And thanks everyone for arriving here and coming and viewing our panel here on the future work that works for everyone. My name is Lawrence Bowdeya. I'm with the Chamber Foundation team. I'm just here to set the stage, to have people who are much more knowledgeable in the space talk about it, but I will take over some of the tech stuff, what to expect moving forward. The panelists are going to speak for a majority of the period. We're happy to sort of take questions and chat. We do ask that people keep their mics and cameras off. We have a lot of material to cover here with our panelists. Other than that, this is being streamed through both our Slido site and YouTube. It's going to be recorded. It'll live at the CCC page. If you're registered for this conference, we'll make sure you get it. So again, the name of this panel is creating a future of work that works for everyone. And I'm going to introduce our moderator, excuse me, our moderator, Bowdeya Tweh, who's the technology news editor for the Wall Street Journal. He's going to lead us and lead these great speakers on what the creating the future of work looks like. And I'll be in the chat if you have any questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the introduction. Again, my name is Bowdeya Tweh. I'm one of the technology news editors at the Journal based in New York, and we have a fabulous panel of individuals here today who are going to take the time to introduce themselves, and then we're going to kick it off with a broad question for everyone to address. So, Angela, I'm going to start with you. If you could just give a short introduction and let everyone know who you are and where you're from.
Thanks, Bowdeya. Angela Jackson, I'm a partner at New Profit, where I lead the future of work strategy and investments. And we've been around for 20 years, investing in social entrepreneurs who are solving complex problems and breaking down barriers between people and their opportunities.
Great. Ruben, you want to take it next?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ruben Harris. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Career Karma. And Career Karma is the easiest way to find a job training program online. We serve blue-collar workers between the age of 25 and 35 years old who are wanting to get a job in tech. And we help workers get jobs in 6 different career paths in technical and non-technical roles. I also host a podcast called Breaking Into Startups, which is the world's largest podcast in the world for people breaking into tech, among a bunch of other things. But that's where I am. Thank you.
And then Dalila, you mind picking it up from there?
Hi, my name is Dalila Wilson-Scott. I'm here representing Comcast, and just thrilled to be here today talking about the future of work, something that all of us are experiencing in different ways. And I think we have a great panel that can cover different perspectives on that issue. So thank you.
Okay. And then Fred at the end.
Hi, I'm Fred Goff. I get the pleasure of running Jobcase, a social media platform dedicated to empowering workers. If you know how that Amazon delivery person got their job and what they're doing next, or how that Starbucks barista got their job or what they're going to do next, and you've probably heard of us, we have 100 million registered members, about 20 million active each month. ComScore has us listed as top 5 career destination in the States. But what we're about is a community and tools to help people navigate future of work, figure out what to do next. And it's the community aspect that really defines us. It's a place where people help people.
Excellent. So clearly you heard a wide range of experiences across the workforce spectrum. So I'm going to start with a broad question that, I'd like everyone to pick up and have a chance to answer. So how has the pandemic really reshaped the future of work and your ideas about whether people in certain industries can prepare or are adequately prepared for that shift?
What we know is that the trends that we all knew very well going into the pandemic have essentially been accelerated. So we've often heard people talk about automation of a variety of different industries, not just technology-centric industries, and you're seeing that happen faster. I mean, as recent as August, there are estimates that say that essentially 2.5 million jobs, over 2.5 million jobs, may have already been permanently lost just in this past month because of the acceleration. Customers are demanding a different type of service from their various companies that they they buy products and services from. For us at Comcast, we've been focused on the digital divide for the past decade. We know that everyone is now at the table thinking more broadly about digital equity, understanding how much of an issue it is. Before there was focus on the homework gap, but now we know not having access to technology, the appropriate skills to leverage that technology is a bigger barrier and is certainly widening the opportunity gap for our most vulnerable populations.
Yeah, I think I'll pick up right there. For me at New Profit, we've been thinking about it's less about can people prepare for the future of work, but really how our systems can begin supporting people. I like to call the future of work, we're now in the present of work, really. And we know pre the pandemic that a lot of our systems weren't working for a lot of people. There are people who were left out on, along the lines of race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic background. And we know that's only been heightened by the pandemic. So I'm most interested in how we rebuild our economy in a new way that works for everyone. When people say, let's get back to normal, I'm like, normal didn't work for a lot of people, right? So let's think about systematically, what are things that we can do differently to ensure that people have access to internet, that in this period of lifelong learning, that people have opportunities to learn and upskill and have a chance to learn new skills.
Yeah, I'll say I agree with everything everybody just said. I think the two major trends that the pandemic has accelerated is number one, the unbundling of higher education, and then number two, the increased demand for skills training. So when you think about the unbundling of higher education, you see a lot of rapid reskilling models that are being introduced by colleges and universities themselves. You see partnerships with universities and different last mile training programs. You see employers launching their own credentials. You see employers dropping the requirement to have a college degree, period. And there's a big emphasis on this skills gap and credentials and all this stuff that people have talked about for a long time. But I like what Frederick was talking about related to community and being a human being, because certificates and degrees don't get you jobs. Being the best version of you, who you are, is actually what gets you the job. Because if everybody has the same skill set and the same credential, the reason why an employer is going to hire you is because of who you are. So the challenge for a lot of people is not just getting skills and degrees, it's learning how to communicate and present themselves, especially in a remote work world. You don't just have to be good at video, you have to be good at written communication. You got to be good at speaking emoji and meme and GIF and things like that. And so those are the major things that are being accelerated that I'm seeing.
Yeah, so Bowdeya, I'll give an amen to my three fellow panelists. I think we are aligned on this. The only friction I have is you took a lot of my talking points. What I would say that we didn't highlight, which I celebrate completely, what they're discussing in terms of what has COVID done. I think there's an aspect that's wonderful, if we're allowed to say that about COVID, which is it's all seen now. Angela has mentioned she's been working on this problem. I know that Ruben started this company. He's seen these issues. Dalila is working at Comcast and ensuring that a large employer is seeing and participating. There's an awful lot of people that have been seeing this inequality. And all of a sudden, what COVID's done on this acceleration of trends, in particular, this K-shaped recovery, this recovery where you have the investor class completely protected, shooting up to the right, and yet so many people being left behind at risk of eviction, et cetera. I mean, we saw just this week, there's an article at Thomson Reuters talking about the 2,000 billionaires have increased their wealth by a quarter to like $10 trillion. By the way, didn't know there was 2,000 billionaires. That's a new learning for me. And then the second article you see is it's coming out that the Aspen Institute at the end of August was projecting that when the extraordinary benefits go away, there's going to be 30 to 40 million people at risk of eviction, right? So those are just two stats that I'm sure my fellow panelists can ratchet off. These are these trends and how they can destabilize the whole foundation of what we're doing are really dangerous. But here's the thing that I think is wonderful. We all see it now, right? So part of my company, we usually say, you got to drive your own career. I think everybody realizes, oh boy, I've got to drive my own career now. I've got to figure this out. That's healthy for people to understand that agency. And at the same time, we see governments and nonprofits, and we see employers saying the right thing. Let's see if they can do the right actions. Would be wonderful too. But we see the problem. And I think that is a huge a huge advancement from the dialogue that was here 3 or 4 years ago, where people were questioning if there's an issue in inequity. That people were questioning, is the future of work not going to be wonderful for everyone? All right, we see this because the issue is, if we see it, a lot of the trends that we think could be really dangerous, automation displacing jobs, can also make, to Bowdeya's point, or I'm sorry, I think it was Ruben's point, can make education free and available online, so you can move yourself ahead. So this is the moment that we all see the problems, whether you're in government, nonprofit, employer, education, individuals. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Right? The question is, what are we going to do about it? And that's what panels like this are really good to surface, because hopefully it's not just discussing the problem, but hopefully giving a few action steps that those in the audience can say, okay, there's a takeaway I can act on.
So in terms of the specific reskilling point, Angela, Ruben, you could probably address this, but in terms of a call to action, what has been your respective organizations' call to action, and just and help people, like walk people through who might not be familiar with it, just like how how you might have changed the direction, or whether you've changed the direction that your organizations are already going, or if it in some senses underpinned what you were already doing and maybe made some of those conversations easier, that people say, oh, I get it now. Like, this is, like Fred said, these problems were laid bare for everyone to see. Well, have your respective organizations been able to capitalize on some of that and just like and see some momentum in some of your initiatives?
Yeah, I think one thing we did is we launched the Future of Work Grand Challenge. And when I joined New Profit 2 years ago, we were talking about the future of work. It was really like an upmarket conversation. So how can you get middle level executives to higher wage jobs and higher level careers? And really, when we looked at a lot of the research, we know that there were certain people who were going to be disproportionately impacted. So one thing we did as an organization is that we decided to center equity in everything that we were doing around this Future of Work Grand Challenge. So we're partnering with XPRIZE and MIT Solve, and training is one part of it. So we came out with the Rapid Reskilling XPRIZE, which is incentivizing entrepreneurs to think about accelerated learning programs. So how you can cut the training by 50%. But as a colleague said, you can't train your way to equity. And really what that means is that, upskilling is just one part of it. What are the wraparound supports? And what is that system structures that need to be there so that a person who's facing eviction has the mindset, right? And the mind space to even think about upskilling. So we're also partnering with MIT Solves on the pathways to employment to think about what other solutions can we help people, parents who are at home, who are homeschooling, to think about how we can create solutions that meet them where they are. And the other thing that we're doing is, when we think about the $6 million that we're going to invest in entrepreneurs, we're looking for entrepreneurs who are coming from these communities, who are bringing some insights about the actual target population, who have the same lived experience. So we can actually give a different type of entrepreneur a chance at solving this problem, right? Because we've solved it in many different ways before and it didn't work. So now we need some new insights coming to the table. And so at New Profit, really thinking about 1, accelerated training, 2, wraparound supports, and then 3, looking at a different type of entrepreneur, looking at entrepreneurs of color, and making sure that they have a seat at the table and they have a chance to innovate.
Yeah, so I agree with everything Angela just said. Rapid reskilling is one of the most critical issues of our time, not just economically, but also politically in the United States and all over the world. And there's a great poet named Jay-Z once said, there's a million ways to get it, choose one, right? So historically, college was just branded as the only way to get a job, right? But 2/3 of Americans don't have college degrees, and 43% of first-year grads are underemployed. And so, historically, boot camps and trade schools had a stigma on them, but now people are open to hiring from any training program. That the brand for last mile training is actually starting to get even more exciting. There's 16 million people per year that go through boot camps and trade schools every single year. There's 20 million through college. So that's comparable right there alone. I think something else that the pandemic accelerated that Frederick touched on is online education and distance learning. The reason why this is important is not just because you can train from anywhere, right? So there's 1.5 billion people that are online now because of school closures. You can train from anywhere, but most of the people that are training are actually parents, right? And so you need flexibility in your schedule. So not just full-time programs, you need part-time programs and self-paced programs, and you need systems like what Angela's talking about around wraparound support. Like how do you get, and even what Dalila was talking about related to getting access to a device or Wi-Fi and different things like that, access to churches and gyms and basements to be able to work together and create these like self-run communities that Frederick also talked about. So yes, we're seeing this across the board, and I think rapid reskilling and job training is not just bucketed to boot camps, but colleges are launching these, trade schools are launching these. And the last thing that I'll say, and I know I'm rambling a little bit, is the accessible financing part. You know, boot camps kind of, and we'll talk about this later, but they pioneered this income share agreement model that now is spreading to colleges, it's spreading to trade schools, but there's other financing options like deferred tuition, there's corporate ISAs, there's low-cost payments. There's a bunch of really unique things that are happening, and this is the greatest reallocation of labor since World War II. And I do think that we're going to see something very similar to the GI Bill that's going to happen, but who knows? We'll see at the debate maybe tonight.
So Fred, we talked in terms of the population of folks who use Jobcase. What are some of the common concerns that people who are using the platform to find work? What is the most common concern that they have if they're looking for their next opportunity? And is there, are you finding that the people who are utilizing the service, while they might be obviously looking for a different line of work, we talked about the need for, one of the biggest barriers in terms of moving up or moving into different roles is because there's other things that might not be in place that might make it difficult to take that next step. So what are you seeing? What are you hearing from people using the platform? And then how does this shape, kind of, how you best serve them?
That's a good meaty question, Bowdeya. I'd say I'd kind of address it in two ways. The first is this year there's a lot of frustration and anxiety is what's in the seed conversations as we think of it as the geeks providing the platform. And so the example would be traditional things like the black hole of putting an application and not hearing back, trying to figure out what to do. Are they hiring or not? Just confusion about that. We also continue to see the isms. Racism, genderism, ageism is a huge one right now. It's ageism in terms of an increasing conversation. I think that's most likely the rationale I put on that is it's hitting people's expectations more. I think those that have faced racism and gender bias and things of that nature, sadly, aren't shocked when they encounter it. It's an issue and it's a problem, but they're not shocked. I think folks that find themselves suddenly unemployed at 50, no matter the race or gender, are surprised how much ageism is out there. So that becomes a topic that rises up. But there's a lot of support out there for people. And so what I would go though is, so we have this kind of seed frustration and anxiety of the moment that was probably not surprising in 2020. But there's another layer of your question I'd like to get to, which is, I think for a tremendous amount of the workforce, certainly a tremendous amount of lower wage position holders, it's the question is really, what do you put in the search box? Right? It's, if you think about people that go through to get a computer science engineering degree, a nurse's degree, a doctor's degree, they have their options very constrained, and it's very kind of clear the pathing. But if you have your options open, and that can be a good thing, even though it's internalized with sometimes anxiety, what do you put in the search box? And that's really the opportunity right now, because we kind of have to bring some Clay Christensen thinking to this. We have to think about, what are we really trying to solve, right? You're not trying to solve the next W-2 job. You're not trying to solve, well, I was a cashier and I was laid off, I need another cashier position. You're trying to solve, how can I have a meaningful work? How can I get meaningful income for my family? How can I, and what's exciting is if we can surface the heat map, if you will, of opportunities that are available to people, but it has to be surfaced with a couple other things. It has to be surfaced with a path to actually getting it done. And it has to be surfaced with a community that says, and you can do it. That's the formula. We've seen it work. And so the example I'd say is right now, there might be plenty of people out there who would love to get some certification for the trades. Well, they probably don't know that if you're actually a part-time or full-time employee at Lowe's, they'll help subsidize that, right? They might be thinking this is all out of pocket. How do you discover that? How do you discover that you're a cashier, but that's actually something you might want to do in the first place? So these motions of things that when we get into like those of us who do this for a living called adjacencies, right? I'm a cashier, what is adjacent to that? Or, you know, discovery processes. We have to do this adjacencies and pathing. But then this really important notion of community that you hear Ruben and I riffing off of, it's not enough for you to say, well, you can be a nurse if you haven't done it before. It's incredibly empowering if another human being says, and I think you can do it. I did it too, walk the path. And this isn't an authoritative voice. It's not some employee of Jobcase or LinkedIn. It's about another human being. And it can be somebody you don't know, which is what we figured out. It doesn't have to be a first or second degree connection. And so that's what I see underneath your question. On the surface level, go to jobcase.com today. You're going to see a lot of seed anxieties and then a whole bunch of comments bolstering people up. Oh, that happened to me too. Don't give up, and et cetera. What's underneath that is a need to discover what's in my realm of possible and how the heck do I get there?
So on that front, I mean, I'd like to open this up for any panelists to address, like how understanding the tone of conversation is difficult. Like there are a lot of people who are finding themselves in who are looking to the future and maybe displaced from work or looking for the next opportunity with excitement. And some people do have that, you know, do have anxiety. What gives you guys hope that, you know, about the opportunity that some people can actually make transitions meaningfully, and to what extent, are, the larger institutions, and I mean, colleges and potentially like large corporations, to what extent are they, supporting these transitions?
And I can speak to it from a Comcast perspective, first with our own employee base, and then how we think about it more broadly. I mean, last year alone, we did 6 million hours of training, across our employees in a number of different ways. And we have certain areas where we're a lot better positioned from upward mobility in jobs, for instance. So when we think of tech ops, engineering, call center, that's an area of the company, 30,000 jobs. You don't need a college degree to be employed or to start off in that business. But we also know that most of the people that move up and ultimately get promoted to the senior positions, they started in that business. And so taking learnings to see where there's transferability. But I want to speak to the point Fred just raised on adjacency. The Federal Reserve of Philadelphia just released a report not too long ago, workforce is their specialty, about occupational mobility. So I think employees and employers are getting much more sophisticated about how do you assess someone's skills, and forget the job title they may hold, but how do you look at a core set of skills and think about how that skills can transfer to a number of different jobs. So I think that there's so many training programs that are that have a very defined path. And I think all of us are seeing, there's a lot more mobility in the workforce in general, but particularly for people with lower skills. I think making those connections and not defining them by degrees or credentials and having more sophisticated ways of assessing skills is one way to do that. And again, as many of us are thinking about automation, we know what that looks like for our industry. We certainly know what it looks like for our company, making sure we're identifying those individuals who are going to be impacted earlier in that chain. And one, helping them define, assess, and grow their skill set so that they can find opportunities both within and outside of our company. And that helps us be more effective as we're working externally with partners as well.
Yeah. In my opinion, college has always been about community. It's never really been about getting a job, even though that's how it's been sold. And the reason why people tend to get higher wages is because they are more well-rounded sometimes. And some of the things that Frederick, and that's why you see actually massive open online courses actually having a much lower completion rate. So you have over 100 million people completing these MOOCs, with only a 5 to 15% completion rate because it doesn't have that community piece of things. And Frederick touched on a lot of really important points that are related to a concept called imposter syndrome, which many of you all have probably heard before, but connecting with people that have a shared struggle matters. That you can do it is one thing, but another thing is like, I've also been there before. So like if I got rejected from a school because I have bad credit, or if I got rejected from a school just because I didn't pass the exam, sometimes that could psychologically defeat you and prevent you from pursuing your dreams. But if you could talk to another mom or another dad or another veteran that actually went through that same feeling of defeat and bounce back, you can feel that you can do it too, type of system. So I think the other beautiful thing about what we're seeing with this whole even just virtual conference that we're happening in general is people are starting to realize that you can't just throw lectures online to get people into a job. You actually have to figure out how to create community online and offline, right? And so that's literally going to be the key through the process. And also realize that you talk about retention inside of a program, people aren't dropping out of a school because they're worthless or because they're vagabonds or troublemakers. Sometimes a child might have stepped on their laptop, right? So it's super, super important to make sure that we're capturing that. So I just want to say that related to what you all were bringing up.
It's really interesting that you bring that up. We at New Profit, we stood up a worker advisory board. So we have workers in partnership with Goodwill and Accenture. And so we have workers who are representative of the United States who, have been impacted by COVID, who don't have employment. And we've been just talking to them to understand, like, what is their lived reality, like what's happening on the ground right now. And it's very similar to what you said. While there's a lot of programs, a lot of courses, people are having a hard time finding out, like, which course is for me. Are all courses the same? Are all accelerated learning programs the same? We know that they're not. And that's why Career Karma is so important. More than ever, people need access to good information because they're making real-time decisions about how they're going to spend their time. And again, to the point of, I may have been a cashier, what could be next for me? There were sectors that we thought were recession-proof, like travel, hospitality, restaurants. And we're seeing people who may have worked, in a hotel for 10 years who are thinking about, now I'm out of a job, what can I do next? And to Ruben's point, they're not going to go back and get a 4-year degree, right? They may not have time for that. But what can they do in the next 30, 60, 90 days that are going to get them back on track? And so we're thinking really deeply about how can we give people access to good information? And that's one of the things that we're hoping that comes out of this partnership with the Future of Work Grand Challenge. And we're excited to partner with Jobcase and their community because we know that people need access to good information quickly now, solutions that are actually validated. And, we talk about training a lot, but at the end of the day, no one, takes a course just to train. They're hoping to get a job with a living wage. And so we actually want to know which programs have real outcomes in placing people in jobs.
Yeah, Bowdeya, I would just echo one thing, because you started by saying what gives you hope. And I tied together what gives me hope and the call to action we have. This panel gives me hope, right? Like Dr. Jackson is a force of nature, and look at all of that going towards what she defined as going on with the profit program she's doing with New Profit, and the passion that Dalila is talking about with regard to training at Comcast, or the insights that Ruben's bringing as an entrepreneur. We're seeing that all over, right? Governor Raimondo in Rhode Island right now put together a program where employers are guaranteeing jobs. And if somebody doesn't have the education for the job that they have, there are education institutions lined up to provide that education, and it's all paid for. She's already got the funding lined up. That leadership from a governor level. We see that with smaller employers, right? Mod Pizza for years has been a pizza chain that actively hires people with prior court convictions. That's a huge problem in this country. And they're hiring not out of altruism, because it's an incredibly motivated, awesome pool of talent that can help your companies grow. So I think what gives me optimism is how many people see this problem, how much talent is coming to it, but that also brings a responsibility. And I think that we all would, well, I shouldn't assume that. I personally don't expect the leadership or the structural organization at the federal level for a while to lead this. Even with the new election, we're not going to have overnight, all of a sudden, Washington's just, oh, isn't it wonderful how great Washington's working? We've got to do this. We've got to be decentralized. And so the reason I say that is all these wonderful people watching this, whether you're in the room today or whether you're going to watch this video later, just think, what can you do on this problem? If you're, by nature of taking the time to listen this far, you get it. What can you do? And even if it's small, even if it's in your own community, that's going to have a big impact if we can make that go out at the level that Ruben and Angela and Dalila are.
So Fred, I want to continue on that point. You've been very vocal about sort of the need to differentiate between shareholder versus stakeholder commitments among companies. Why do you think that delineation is so important, and how does it kind of build on sort of the conversation that we're having, right now in terms of, how we can move forward and keeping equity in the lens of that?
I think because if employers don't walk the walk on their good intentions, all is for naught, right? We need them as partners at the table. If you look at AI and the risks of that, how artificial intelligence is going to be applied is kind of akin to nuclear science in the 50s, right? So if you're a nuclear scientist in the 50s, are you going to choose building nuclear bombs or powering France? AI can replace tasks or it can replace full jobs. But leadership at companies is going to decide, how are we harnessing this? How are we retraining people? Shareholder value that came into popularism in the 80s in particular, I think was really valuable at the time. I do. I think that I grew up outside of Detroit. We were not a competitive economy in what was evolving as a global economy. And that helped the economy hone a lot of skills that allowed us to have a competitive economy, et cetera. We are long past when that is really the dominant thing we need. We need stakeholder capitalism. And it was wonderful that over a year ago, Bowdeya, the Business Roundtable said it's about stakeholders, not shareholders. That's great. And then that year, JP Morgan had a $40 billion shareholder buyback. They could have taken $8 billion of it and put it towards a windfall bonus. We're not saying you can't have $32 billion of shareholder buyback, but that would have put $30,000 plus in all their workers. So the concept is, if we really think it's stakeholders, not just shareholders, if it's share makers too, then that has the ability of sharing. And imagine what that does for Teller's family and what that can do for education and training to decentralize the agency of figuring out how to go forward. And so, there's a lot of things we can do to walk the walk on stakeholders. But for all of this, we need employers to make sure, not just at the Brian Moynihan level. Brian Moynihan is a wonderful leader of Bank of America, but to follow through and ensure it's going down to all of his HR areas to do a few things, I think. One is this notion of shareholder value. And if you're going to do a shareholder buyback at the Fortune 500, which they did like 90 billion in the second quarter of this year alone during the layoffs, right? There's some money there to also do some windfall bonuses and more community action. The second thing is about a pathway to a living wage, right? So we get that the current economy doesn't support every single job having a living wage. But every single job can be defined as a living wage job or a non-living wage job. And if it's a non-living wage job, as an employer, you have a responsibility of helping that person understand the pathway and getting to a living wage. Can we start there, right? That would be a move forward. And then I think the last one I'll close with as a specific action step that people can do is you've really got to filter out the constraints in your talent funnel. And we're really at risk when unemployment goes high. What happens is a lot of hiring managers say, oh my gosh, look at all the labor pool. I can increase the requirements. I can now get a college degree for something I didn't need. I can add these skills. I can add this. And what that really does is it blocks out massive pools of awesome talent from your organization, because they might not have had a good FAFSA form to be funded to go to a 4-year college, even though they're awesome. And they might have rounded themselves out, to Ruben's point, with different experiences. They might have learned to code at a coding boot camp over a summer. There's so much good talent out there. But what we need to have employers do is scrub those job requirements so that you open up the funnel to who you consider. And here's the thing, not just doing it because it's the right thing to do, which it is, because we're omitting tremendous amounts of great people in this country. And it also contributes to the racial injustice moment we have. It contributes to the economic injustice. But put all that important thing aside one moment. It's good for your company. These are awesome talent. Imagine there's a pool of talent that you've been blind to that's available, waiting to work, waiting to roll up their sleeves and make your company move forward. It's there, but you have to proactively open the door to let them in. So those kind of things, this isn't about saying employers have to do something that's not good for them. It's helping to educate to say, no, your company can grow even more But we have to get off this myopic focus of shareholder value and open up to stakeholder value.
So you touched on something in terms of like something that like opening up the talent funnel. I want to go to you, Ruben, in terms of like, with Career Karma, I mean, coding boot camps and academies aren't necessarily new, but that's one way that, that's one path that's been looked at as potentially reskilling, wide swaths of people, especially in like new forms of economy, in new versions of the economy we are today. Could you explain like whether they've taken on increased importance today? And then what is maybe the most common concerns among people who may be looking at tech as a potential pathway, and how that could serve their prospects down the road?
Yeah. So coding bootcamps and just bootcamps in general, because it's not just coding, are the first rapid reskilling model at scale that helps blue collar workers go from low income to high income in a short amount of time, anywhere from 3 to 24 months. And now that they have set the example since around 2012, you see traditional education players following their lead. So you see trade schools, you see colleges launching their own boot camps on 47 campuses, including the Ivy Leagues. You see 2U, which is the big online education provider for colleges. They just bought Trilogy, which provides college boot camps across the board. So this whole rapid reskilling model is spreading that Angela has been talking about. I think that it's important to understand that when it comes to choosing which school that you want to go to, whether it's run by a boot camp, a trade school, or a college, the main thing that everybody wants to know is, do they have outcomes? Does it get me a job, right? And it's important to understand, because whenever you're in a situation where we are now, where over 55 million Americans are filing for unemployment and 54% of the workforce requires reskilling by 2022, you have some good actors, you have some bad actors. You have some bad actors that want to take advantage of people that are vulnerable to get them to qualify for a loan. And then if they don't get a job, great, I got my money, and you got your piece of paper that you thought was going to get you a job, but it didn't. You have some schools that are like, hey, we understand you're in a vulnerable position. We're going to get you this job, and we're going to do everything we can to get you there. So vetting is very important, which goes back to what Dr. Jackson was talking about related to the importance of choosing a school and being wary of like what information is out there, right? Because these are high stakes, life-changing decisions that we're talking about, and the wrong decision has a high cost of failure that can cause financial ruin for generations to come. After buying a home, choosing a school is the second highest price that decision somebody's going to make in their lifetime. And people aren't just making that decision one time now. As people embrace lifelong learning, you're going from school to school to school and company to company. So those are all factors that are important to understand when it comes to boot camps. The other thing that's interesting about these rapid reskilling models that boot camps have started to do is you're starting to see colleges and boot camps partnering. So for example, you see Southern New Hampshire University has now partnered with Thinkful to provide a job guarantee and a credential. Interesting, right? You've seen Kenzie Academy partner with Washington Governors University and Butler University to also do the same thing, credential and a boot camp. You see Flatiron School partnering with Yale. Very interesting. And so I think you're going to see a lot of collaboration. And you're also going to see what has historically happened, not just with boot camps, but also with colleges. You're going to see a lot of schools shut down. You see a lot of schools buy each other, right? They see a lot of consolidation. Frederick, he talked about Clay Christensen, right? Clay Christensen's RIP, right? He said that half of the colleges are going to go away in the next few years, right? I don't think colleges are going to go away completely, but we're going to see a bunch of little short form courses pop around everywhere. And that's why we really focus on being the easiest way to find the job training program that's best for you, but also giving you that community to discover other people like you that can help you start and finish the program, and then successfully navigate for the rest of your career. And the final thing that I'll say about this point is that the post-secondary education system has been designed to get you your first job, but then you're left alone to navigate 40 years by yourself, right? And so, or more, right? Because people are living longer. And that cycle goes around and around and around. Choose a school, join the school, go through the job search, find a job, get promoted over and over and over. And so we're transitioning into this project-based model where we're not just showcasing our resumes anymore or what school that we went to. We're showing what we've built, and to Frederick's point, we also need to make sure that employers are aligned and make sure that they are hiring from that. And honestly, they're going to have to. You see what's happening with H-1Bs and things like that. I don't think that that's going to change even if we get a different administration. I think a lot of the stuff that's happening related to having to focus on our talent today, we're going to have to double down on last mile training. So it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's a matter of when. And everybody on this panel is playing the long game, and we're listening to workers, and we're going to make sure that we can help millions and billions of people find jobs forever and ever.
You know, there's about 15 minutes left in today's session. I know for any participants, I know you might have heard something interesting and may want to ask questions. You know, feel free to drop those in the chat. There are a couple more things I'll address the panel, but if there's anything that you know that you really want you got a burning desire to get off your chest, definitely put that in the chat, and we'll try to address as soon as we can. One question I have for anybody on the panel to address is how long should people be thinking about these future of work conversations, understanding that, you know, if you lost your job now, obviously you're looking for income replacement almost immediately. But understanding as we talk about this, a lot of these decisions, you know, especially as we talk about college, you know, we're talking about sort of years down the line. So how should people think, like, even if you might be in a recession proof or, you know, in a industry maybe with a lower risk of automation, how long should people really be thinking about, like, how far down the road should they be looking as they think about either, you know, where my job might be or what maybe I would like to be doing, you know, down the road? How do you all see those conversations playing out?
Well, when we talk about the future of work, when we're doing this future of work grand challenge, we're asking innovators to train people for jobs of the future. That time horizon we're looking at is 2 to 3 years. So it's not like you're going to train for a year or 2 years, and then you, like to Ruben said, that you'll be able to do that for the next 10 or 15 years. We're seeing automation and a digital transformation that, like, we've never seen in our lifetimes. And so even with a lot of entrepreneurs who come and say, okay, we should teach people coding, we all know that that's going to be automated within the next year too. So it's really critical that when people are thinking about their time horizon, it's one about what can I learn over the next 2 to 3 years? And then it's also what's going to prepare me for that next rung job. What are the skills that are going to come next? And really think of it that way, because we are in this moment of lifelong learning where, you know, we're just going to have to be prepared as a society, right, that continues to upskill people. So we make it affordable. We make it give incentives to employers to think about, you know, upskilling the employees that they have, and just make it really clear to people that this is just the new normal that we're experiencing.
Yeah, I think we, you know, in this day and age, we have to rid ourselves of, there's a moment where you're done with your education. You know, there was a time where, okay, you finish high school, you get your college degree, and then you're in the role and everything else takes place in the role or the career you have chosen. I mean, that's no longer true. So one, I think you have to sort of accept and acknowledge up front that lifelong learning is real, meaning that in addition to the learning on the job, there will be things that you need to do outside of the workplace when you're out of the workforce to build that skill set. We all know that we're living in an increasingly digital world. And so regardless of whether you think your job is at risk for automation today, to Dr. Jackson's point, it could very well be, and it doesn't take a lot of time for that to happen. So these cycles are very much accelerating, but we know that technology is here to stay and digital skills are here to stay regardless of what industry you're in. I mean, right, it takes as many as 8 out of every 10 jobs requires digital skills to be effective. So I do think we just have to, you know, just disabuse ourselves of this notion that there's going to be a moment where you're done, and figure out how you build out that investment. And I do think employers are doing a better job of that because they understand sort of the cost benefit of doing that in-house. But, you know, it's not happening fast enough.
I think, Bowdeya, there's two things on your question I'd point out to those listening. One is there's an implicit or explicit question view of those at risk and those aren't. I think what would surprise people who aren't focused on these conversations of future work is who's at risk and who's not. A lot of blue collar is not at risk. There's a long way away from any AI that's going to do landscaping and do all sorts of things I can name in construction and trades and et cetera. Those the automation displacements happened, last century, and there's not to say there won't be more to come. What's at risk now is a lot of white collar. Now it's the college educated. Now it's the analysts being laid off or going to globalization. Now it's diagnosticians as ML systems are better at diagnosing cancer than radiologists are and things of that nature. So you have basically, I guess the answer to your question is everybody should be concerned about this. Angela and Dalila, no surprise, have it spot on. The only aspect I'd give to this continuous learning thing is it's a very tough thing for us. Our species, I don't believe, is hardwired for exponential change and growth. And yet that's where we are in the era of our species. This is the first generation that are going to have to deal with this constant change. And we're going to have to figure out a way of making that something that is not dreaded and managed, but excited and fun. Right. And I know that's maybe that sounds simplistic, but it's incredibly important. It's incredibly important. Otherwise, how do you muster the energy to learn again and learn again? Oh, I got to learn a new skill. Are you kidding me? My job's gone again. But if we can switch it to say, look, you're going to learn something. Here's the great news. You don't have to do that for 30 years. You're going to do it for a while. You got two jobs now, the one you're doing and figuring out the one you're going to do next. That's just the way it is. But the good news is the one you're going to do next, you get to choose, right? We're going to have all these pathways. This can be an exciting thing. It's important to get that positivity in, because if we don't have positivity, any of us who have kids, fat chance are going to get something done if they're dreading it the whole time. And fat chance if they are dreading it the whole time, it's going to be done right, right? So in addition to trying to navigate this change, we kind of got to go against our species norms at how do we not just make change something that we know we have to do, but move it into a direction that's something we can be interested and exciting to do. And I don't have the answer to that, but I think it's a very important thing to solve.
Yeah, and we also have to take into account, though, although that's not our norm, it's also about survival, right? So many people are just not financially in a position, right, where they can even think about that. So we have to make sure that people's basic needs are met, right? So like housing, transportation, yep. So they can even be excited about learning. And that's something that we've been talking a lot about, are these just basic supports so people can kind of show up and be ready to work.
That's awesome, man. So we talk here about like Maslow's hierarchy a lot, right? And a lot of different things. That really resonates. Imagine like in the middle of this working and et cetera, and somebody right now might see this and nodding and saying, yeah, I totally get it. And at 9 o'clock at night, after the young kids are tucked to bed and they work 2 different jobs and maybe drove Uber on the way home to make some extra money, they say, okay, great. I'm going to go to the boot camp Ruben turned me on to. Yeah, it takes a lot. And so hopefully that's that leadership that hopefully politicians like Governor Raimondo start to win out on to help pave the way.
Yeah, and I think we do need to think about that. One of our experts, she's a nurse, and she's homeschooling her 3 kids during the day, and then at night, she's working an overnight shift. And I think about her, she's excited about learning, but I was like, how long is this actually going to be sustainable for her?
Yeah.
Where's the support for someone who's motivated, who wants to work? She's really at risk now of leaving the job market, literally working around the clock. So we have to figure out ways to keep people engaged in the game and just, again, having that mind space and opportunity to upskill.
So I know we probably have a few minutes left, but I know I've asked the question of sort of what gives you hope, but Dalila, I want to ask you, obviously, Dalila, I apologize. You're focused on the digital divide. You spend a lot of your time and energy and kind of like thinking about it and trying to position Comcast to be in the right spot in terms of providing the service. But in your mind, what might be one of the more challenging elements of addressing the issue going forward? Is it federal or state policy? Understanding that, as we're trying to prepare, everyone here is talking about the future of work, and some component of that is, spending larger amounts of time online. So what might be among the more challenging elements of doing that? And maybe how are you maybe trying to position your way around that?
Sure. I mean, I think what we know is that the challenges we had before the pandemic, are certainly exacerbated in this moment. There's the issue of access, and, people tend to think about the rural pockets around the country where there is no access to internet service. But we focus a lot of our time on urban centers where internet access is widely available, but there are other issues that are about barriers to adoption. And affordability is still an issue for some people. I mean, we have 38 million people in the country right now living in poverty, and to have to trade off and understand when internet access is critical enough, even when it's low cost, is still a tough decision for most people. It's not the biggest barrier, but it still is a barrier for people. You know, this year alone, now with school being online, starting way back in the spring, we've been partnering with, you know, those cities and states and school districts willing to kind of think more broadly and be more innovative about how do we pull our resources together to provide more free access, especially for children in schools. The second issue is technology and equipment. You know, so having smartphone access is something that more people have access to, but a wired connection in the home is certainly more stable. You're going to get, you know, more reliability there. Trying to apply for a job, do a coding bootcamp course is virtually impossible. It's not going to be a high quality experience through a smartphone. You need a wired connection to do that, and you certainly need a device. And, you know, there's been a shortage of devices at different points in time this year, given everyone sort of being required to be online, but that is still a critical issue, and discounting devices and providing free devices is still something all of us have to be focused on. And the last one, I think, which ties into a lot of what we've been talking about, is digital skills. So first you think about just the literacy of being online. You know, all of us are fortunate to be in roles where, you know, we can do this panel from home. We can figure out how to rearrange our workflow to make it possible. When we're talking about who we're all trying to serve, you know, vulnerable populations, that's not necessarily the case. So getting people familiar with the, you know, how do I even sign on? What do I need to do? How do I access resources once the internet is made available? And once I have that basic level of digital literacy, right, because connectivity is just the starting point, how then do I make some of the decisions we've been talking about? You know, do I start with the coding bootcamp? What do I do after that? How do I find the employer link to that? How do I even evaluate the coding bootcamps like Ruben was talking about? And, you know, often the best way to get a job is to have a job, but you need to have multiple steps along that pathway, which is really, really important. And I think that's something that we're certainly committed to doing. But connectivity is still a huge issue. You know, we're hearing more about connectivity this year than any other year, as many of us live in urban centers where many populations live across our country. People didn't recognize that it could be up to 30% of people in major metropolitan markets that are not connected to the internet at home. You know, there's so many people who can't even function without the internet, and just think of what that means now in this pandemic. So the barriers are still there. I think we have a lot more stakeholders willing to lock arms and figure out this issue, but we know that connectivity is only the first part. We really need to focus on the rapid reskilling. We've been focused on skilling beyond that. You know, there's kind of the urgency in the moment, but also just, you know, another plug for just seeking out innovative solutions. We're glad to be a partner of Angela's on the Future of Work Grand Challenge. I know, you know, Alex from MIT Solve was here, partnering with her on the Racial Justice Equity Challenge, and really putting a spotlight on proximate leadership. Angela just wrote a great piece about that. People who are close to the solutions are going to approach it from a different perspective and likely have better ideas than those of us who are not as close. And I think that has to be something we do differently in this moment as we come out of this pandemic.
Fantastic. I think that might be all the time we have today. So I really appreciate our wonderful esteemed panel for sharing their thoughts and ideas. Hopefully you all the participants, those who are viewing live and those who will view this later, will have some nuggets to take away, and they can bring back to their teams and families as well. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look to hear from you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bowdeya and everyone. Appreciate the panel. We're going to be on break till about 1 o'clock, where we'll go back to the Slido platform, and we'll start with New Age Tech Culture. And then after that, our Digital Empowers Pitch for Purpose competition announcements and planning will happen after that. So hope to see you.